This video is about the articulatory setting of the tongue when speaking English. This is sometimes called the basis of articulation. It refers to the underlying posture which is given to the tongue, which is held throughout the length of an utterance, and from which any individual articulation of a sound is made. Now, I'm assuming that you've read the introduction to the notion of an articulatory setting, which was activity 1 this week, and also that you've watched the videos of the American speaker and the Chinese speaker. We're all familiar with this kind of cutaway view, a side-on view of the head, and it's very good for giving students information about some aspects of the tongue's movements and positions. But it doesn't show the lateral movement of the tongue, and for that reason it's not very helpful when we come to articulatory settings. So what we do instead is to construct a three-dimensional view of the tongue and the inside of the mouth using Cuisenaire rods. We're about to show you how we construct that model, and we'll use it to illustrate the difference in the tongue setting for English as compared to French. We're going to make two mouths. So we need 8 red rods for each of the two tongues, and we need 16 white rods for the teeth, and finally we're going to use a green rod for each of the two alveolar ridges. And if we divide them up into two, so we'll divide them there and there, and the first thing to do is to create a mouth. So let's create a couple of mouths. So here we are creating our mouths. There. Now we want to create two tongues. Now, the tongue for the French one, and it's also going to apply to other languages as well, is going to look like this. There we go. And we just shoot the French tongue into the mouth. Here we are, and the French tongue typically will be touching down there. That's what a French tongue looks like inside somebody's mouth. Whereas an English tongue gets spread at the back, 5 at the back, 3 there, 3 there, so we'll have 3 there, 3 there, 3 there. We'll just advance the little tip there, and then we'll slide the English tongue into place. There's the English tongue, and you can see it coming into contact at the back. There, because it's spread at the back, we have, because it's spread at the back, the tip is retracted. There we go, something like that. Now what you can see is you've got two tongues of the same volume, but there's a difference in that the English tongue is spread at the back, and therefore because it's got spread at the back, there isn't so much room at the front. Now, what we can add onto this is we can add an alveolar ridge. So I'll put a couple of top teeth on there, and the alveolar ridge there, and the same thing over here, a couple of top teeth, and the alveolar ridge. And what you can hopefully see, or you could if we had a different camera angle, is that in the French tongue it's the blade of the tongue which is nestling underneath the alveolar ridge, and when the tongue gets raised it will naturally be the blade which comes into contact with the alveolar ridge, whereas in English, because we've got this spreading at the back, the tip of the tongue gets pulled backwards, and when it gets raised it will be the thing which contacts the alveolar ridge. We're comparing English to French with these models, but the French tongue position is similar to that adopted by speakers of most of the world's languages, so the models have general applicability. In both pictures, the model for French is nearest to us, the English one is further away. On the left-hand side, we can see the mouths without alveolar ridges, and it's clear that the two tongues have the same volume. Both are made up of 8 rods. But the spreading of the tongue at the back in English has pulled the tip of the tongue backwards. On the right, with the alveolar ridges in place, you can see the effect this has. When the French tongue is raised, it's the blade which most naturally comes into contact with the alveolar ridge, and this is how the closure for T, D and N is made in French. When the English tongue is raised, it's the tip that contacts the alveolar ridge for these so-called alveolar consonants. The use of the blade, or the tip, for alveolar consonants has significant practical consequences. It's easier to relax the tip and to make a weak rather than a firm closure with it. So the tongue in English can then be blown away from the alveolar ridge passively by the pressure of air behind it. This pressure, of course, being created by the push of the abdominal muscles for the stressed syllable. The result is the aspiration of T in English when a T starts a stressed syllable. These are slightly more elaborate models, showing how, for English, the sides of the tongue at the back are slightly raised. The reason why the English basis of articulation is called the butterfly position becomes clearer. The wings of the butterfly are slightly higher than its body. Note that English speakers aren't pushing strongly against their side molars with the back of their tongues. It's a loose contact, a slight tethering or stabilization of the tongue. Similarly, French speakers and speakers of other languages don't have the tip of their tongues firmly pressed against their lower front teeth, but this is still a reference point for the tongue when speaking these languages. If you're not a native speaker, now try and adopt the English articulatory setting for your tongue. Spread it at the back, feel its sides against your upper molars, and then say these words, keeping the tip of the tongue relaxed, making sure you have a good strong stress push with your abdominal muscles, and just letting the air pressure behind the tip of the tongue blow it away from your alveolar ridge. In your language, you may well actively remove the tongue from the alveolar ridge to make a T, but this time just let it happen passively. What you'll discover is that the aspiration that is associated with a stressed T in English will come naturally. If you are a native speaker, become sensitive again to exactly where your tongue is when you say these words, and try to consciously relax the tip, and again say it as if you were hyperarticulating, as if perhaps you were a child saying these words for the first time with a strong stress push. And then do the same again with these two-syllable words, making sure that you make the second syllable on the remnants of the breath pulse. Your students won't get this right first time. They'll need to go into a practice cycle and perhaps go through this several times before they can integrate everything together into one smooth movement. So they'll need to make sure they get the tongue right, the position of the tongue, the relaxation of the tip, making sure that it's the tip that comes into contact with the alveolar ridge rather than the blade of their tongue when they're trying to make a stressed T in English. They'll need to make sure they get the abdominal push correct on the stressed syllables. And of course, for the extra syllable on a two-syllable word, to make sure that it's being made on the remnants of the push rather than being made on a separate additional push. When they've been through the cycle a few times, they'll start to integrate everything nicely. Now if we take some longer phrases, we've got the chance to integrate more of what we've looked at previously. So for these two phrases here, first of all start off when making sure you've got the articulatory setting of English right for the tongue, so spread at the back so the tip gets retracted. Then on all the T's, make sure that the tip of the tongue is relaxed. Make sure there's a good strong abdominal push for all the stresses, but all the unstressed syllables are produced on the remnants of pulses. And whenever there's the chance to make a stutter between two consonants for a schwa, do that. As with P, of course, T is only aspirated when it starts a stressed syllable. If it's at the end of a stressed syllable, or if it's at the start of an unstressed syllable, there won't be the stress push, the push with the abdominal muscles that creates the aerodynamic energy, which in turn leads to aspiration. But we don't have to think about these things in terms of rules. If we get the stress pulses right, then aspiration will come naturally in the right places, and it won't be present in the wrong places. We're gradually putting together the pieces of English pronunciation, which will result in the whole thing being very coherent. It's all based on physical actions. We've seen, for example, that stress is made up of a push of the abdominal muscles, that reduction, the so-called schwa sounds, are often no more than just stutters or stutter-like gestures between consonants. In English, the principal articulators are quite relaxed, either the lips or the tip of the tongue. And the English articulatory setting for the tongue, spread at the back, means that the tip of the tongue gets retracted. What we're going to be seeing next week is how all of these things affect all of the different sounds of English.